Dr. Fauci had made his way into the circles of the intelligence community and had steered them away from a Wuhan leak to his favored course of theme, which is the proximal origin. Now we have the proof to it. Tulsi Gabbard, as she exited for the last time in her role as Director of National Intelligence, declassified documents, and now we have the evidence, not just some declassified emails. We have the actual readouts from the CIA meetings, so that when Dr. Fauci was under oath in June of 2024, and he was asked point blank, have you ever spoken to the CIA, FBI, or DIA about COVID? And his answer was, not to my knowledge.
We had discussions with intelligence agencies about that possibility.
But not as related to, say, COVID-19.
Not to my knowledge about COVID.
But now we know he distinctly did on numerous occasions. And the pattern in the story is working out that Dr. Fauci has been the go-to guy for the intelligence community on all of these health-related issues for the last several decades. And he has steered the community in that direction. There was some vague report that came out from Lawrence Livermore Labs, their intelligence arm, that said, we think it might be a lab leak. And now we have those as the first documents that Tulsi actually declassified. And it's very clear from the Lawrence Livermore Labs, they thought right away in May of 2020, this was a lab leak, and there's no other way to explain it. And so we have Dr. Fauci's footprints and fingerprints all over this as he hightailed it over to Langley, as he hightailed it to all of these SCIFs to have these private conversations with the intelligence community in which they said, well, we really need to shore up this report if it's not a lab leak. And what did he give them? He gave them all of the names of the scientists who had all written articles and made their determination of the proximal origin, if you recall, that this was not a lab leak. It came from the wet market.
Christian Anderson, I heard him in several podcasts saying, no, Dr. Fauci did not in any way persuade us. He let us arrive at our own conclusions. There was a whole group of us gathering, and we kept moving towards I mean, I don't know how the hell they could ignore the lab leak by hypothesis even. They seemed just completely unwilling to look at that. But they did build a case for proximal origin. They just didn't attempt to build a case for the lab leak at the same time.
But as Dr. Atlas will tell you, he would go into these meetings and he would have his documents, he would have his studies, he would have all this data. He says, here's mine, where is yours? And they typically had nothing. They didn't bring anything to the table. And now we know why. Because they were just CYA the entire time. And how do you do that in an official capacity where you go into a SCIF with the Central Intelligence Agency and the other intelligence groups, and you try to persuade them in the direction that you want them because your story has to win. Otherwise, it comes out that you funded the research that killed millions of people across the world.
Okay, so that was the reason for the obfuscation and the dance, was to make sure people didn't find out that we funded this research, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't forget it was
Francis.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I say, don't forget, EcoHealth Alliance, which was the vehicle through which Fauci funded this, had gone to DARPA, the cutting edge of the defense industry, who will accept a lot of crazy projects, and they said, this is too risky. In fact, you don't even make an attempt to identify the risks of what you're trying to do here. And instead, Dr. Fauci funded EcoHealth Alliance, which then went over to Wuhan, and they did a lot of that same technology. No matter what he wants to call it, he's basically harping back to it depends what the definition of is. It was gain of function research. He funded it. It leaked, and that's where we ended up. It's a crazy scene.
That is exactly the phrase that I have been saying to people. It harkens back to Bill Clinton, who said famously, "It depends what is," as a defense. Something to do with Monica Lewinsky, as I recall. But the reality is, he's going to obfuscate around the definition of gain of function. I've heard him say that pass-throughs is not gain of function, while anybody who sort of speaks English would say you're either gaining function for infectivity or you are not doing things to improve and gain function of infectivity to human beings.
It's a difficult thing. This is all very opaque. By one map that we have from China, the lab where they were producing this, because the Wuhan Institute had several labs around the city, was basically a stone's throw, if you will, a 6-minute walk to this wet market, right? And so that was conveniently located. Look, it's very clear. Fauci funded it. He shaped the science. He steered the intelligence community. And then he testified under oath that he did none of that, right? The contours were there for 3 years, and now we have the receipts. So that's really what this is coming down to. I mean, this isn't just like, oh, I happen to remember. He spent 40 minutes in a classified SCIF with the CIA talking about COVID.
Well, that's one of the things I noticed in your article, at least in some of the emails you reprinted in the article, is that there was, I don't understand this landscape, so you're going to have to clarify this for me. There was talk about sort of being boxed in by classified information. Like they couldn't talk about it, they couldn't exchange it, they couldn't go public. What was that? Do you remember those emails where they were really kind of saying, well, because of this, we can't do that? I mean, I understand what classified is, but what information were they actually talking about?
Yeah, I think they were talking about, for example, that Lawrence Livermore space intelligence report, which came out in May 2020, and other pieces of information that we now have access to, which basically just indicated again and again. And it wasn't just like, well, it was likely a lab leak. It's like, no, there's a cleavage site, the actual biological mechanism through which we think it was modified for gain of function is there in the evidence. That's far beyond my pay grade. But my colleagues who are very adept in this thing will tell you right away, the evidence was there from the get-go as you look through the actual biological evidence to say, this sure looks I think it was Christian Anderson who said, it friggin' looks like it was a lab leak. And that's the case that we think they should have made continually, but instead they decided to go the safe route because, their fingerprints were all over funding.
They really downplayed that furin cleavage site because of its existence in other clades of coronavirus. It never gets anywhere near COVID-19's furin site, that whole clade. No way. That got inserted into the spike protein. I mean, that's just the way it is. There's no other way it got there. And I've spoken to Chinese scientists who claim to have been involved in that research. They claim they were actively doing this, and it was a project of the People's Liberation Army.
Yeah, this has a lot of crazy fingerprints. You heard Rand Paul at the beginning talking about Dr. Ralph Barrick from the University of North Carolina, and he co-authored a paper with what later became the Batwoman, right? And all of this information is there. We all have the evidence of it. And then, of course, I think the big breaking point for us was when David Morenz, who is a long-time, decades-long co-author with Dr. Fauci, his right-hand man in many ways, got in front of Congress and revealed how much they were hiding. Dr. Drew, they would literally rename the words gain of function, throw a little pound sign in there or an @ sign to throw off FOIA. They would go to the FOIA lady, is what they called her, at the NIH and find for ways to do that. I was just with my friend, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's there at the NIH. Pinch me that he's in charge of this thing. I have a lot of great confidence that he's going to clean up those halls because it was a mess. And that was just the beginning, if you remember, about the origin. The rest of it, we could spend the rest of our lives talking about lockdowns and school closures and the damage that it did at the hands of Dr. Fauci's assessments.
Yeah.